Good afternoon. My name is Chelsea Ryder. I'm the Director of Professional Development for the National Sheriff's Association. I want to thank you all for attending and welcome you to today's webinar, Cultivating an Engaged Team, Strategies and Techniques to Support Positive Morale in Law Enforcement. Throughout today's webinar, if you have any questions, there's a Q&A panel that'll be located in the lower right-hand part of your screen. There are 3 dots and a Q&A panel will pop up there. We ask that you submit your questions there. And with that, I'm just going to hand it over to our moderator, Charles Edwards.
Chelsea, thank you very much, and thank you all for joining today's webinar. We really do appreciate your time this afternoon. The webinar is titled Cultivating an Engaged Team, Strategies and Techniques to Support Positive Morale in Law Enforcement. My name is Charles Edwards. I'm one of the facilitators at Jackson Spalding. It's a full-service marketing and communications agency, and we are partnering with Utility. We're proud agency partners with Utility. And as I said, I'm here moderating the discussion on behalf of Utility, the innovative technology company that continually delivers groundbreaking digital systems for frontline professionals who rely on speed, accuracy, easy-to-access data, and transparency in their work. We're proud to be here in partnership with the National Sheriff's Association. And today I am joined by 2 members of a sheriff's office. They will introduce themselves in just a moment. We're also here with public safety psychologist Dr. Troy Rogers. They've all come together to share unique perspectives on how agencies can build morale to positively impact retention and job satisfaction. And they're also going to be talking about how they're implementing these insights with their teams. So let's get started with our panel. So we do have Sergeant Tom Shaddy of the Washington County Sheriff's Office. We also have Deputy Amanda Geislinger, also from the Washington County Sheriff's Office, and Dr. Troy Rogers, who is a police and public safety psychologist. First with Dr. Rogers, would love for you to do a quick introduction of yourself so people get a sense of the expertise that you're bringing to the table.
Yes. Can you guys all hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Oh, perfect. I am Troy Rogers. I am a police and public safety psychologist out of the New Mexico area. Been doing this work in one capacity or another for almost 20 years. Currently, we work with about 300 to 400 different first responder organizations, including law enforcement, fire, corrections, kind of everybody in the public safety arena. So that's my background.
Dr. Rogers, thank you for that. Now let's go to the Washington County Sheriff's Office. Sergeant Shaddy, we'll have you tell us a little bit about yourself, and then following you, we'll have Deputy Geislinger tell us a little bit about herself as well.
So yeah, I'm Tony Shaddy. I've been with the Washington County Sheriff's Office for a little over 23 years. During that time, I fulfilled various different capacities. I was Corrections Emergency Response Team, Mobile Field Force, instructor for some of our less lethal systems. But most currently, for the last 4 years, I've been in charge of recruiting for the Sheriff's Office. Back in about 2016, we decided that we needed to take recruiting seriously. Our staffing levels were becoming a little low, and so we implemented a recruitment team that we had never had before. In 2018, I took over that team as the sergeant, and since then have been trying to build ways to build up our staffing levels and also help retain our staffing levels.
Sergeant Shaddy, thank you very much. Deputy Geislinger, would love to hear a little bit about you and your expertise as well.
Hi, everyone. I'm Amanda Geislinger. I've been a deputy with the Washington County Sheriff's Office for just over 9 years. I started out my career working in the jail for about 3.5 years. Then I transferred over to patrol for the last 5.5 years. And then the last 2 years, I've been doing full-time recruitment with Sergeant Shaddy. I've been on a couple different special teams within the Sheriff's Office, and just really looking forward to continuing our recruitment efforts.
All right. Well, Deputy Geislinger, Sergeant Shaddy, and Dr. Rogers, thank you for that quick introduction. I want to really ground everyone on what we're talking about today. So this discussion is really built around recent research that in just last year, 2021, revealed that 77% of law enforcement polled felt that the morale had decreased in their agency in just the past year. Moreover, they resoundingly shared what they wanted from their leaders. And it really came down to three things. They wanted communication, they wanted consistency, and they wanted care. So, with this in mind, we've gathered this group here to gain insight into how they've actively addressed this feedback to balance these areas of focus. And we're going to talk about some specific areas as well. And you see those on the screen. The first will be the barriers to positive morale. We're also going to talk about programs and planning efforts to build strong relationships within sheriff's offices. We'll also dive into implementing technology solutions to support recruitment and retention. We'll talk about implementing technology solutions to streamline the workload. And then we'll also dive into developing key performance indicators and communication strategies, communication solutions to support engagement. So, with that said, we'd like to dive into our questions. And as Chelsea said, as you're listening to this conversation, we'd love to hear from you. So, if you have a question, feel free to drop it in the chat and let us know, and we'll read your questions as a part of our program. But I do have some questions that I'd love to start with. And Sergeant Shaddy, I'd love to start with you. So, let's talk about what you believe are the most pressing barriers to positive morale within law enforcement agencies. What stands out to you there?
I think some of them more of the pressing barriers right now is a lot of it is the perceived community dissatisfaction with law enforcement right now, and I say perceived because I don't think it's necessarily true that there isn't a community backing. I think there's enough resources out there to show that the community still supports law enforcement. I think a lot of it is just people don't want to do law enforcement. And so that's kind of the barriers we're running into right now. As far as morale goes, I feel right now with our agency, at least our morale is a little bit on the rise because they can see the efforts that we're putting into to kind of go to help some of the barriers. But again, it's hard, and filling vacancies right now, I think, is one of and staffing levels is a morale killer right now, just because there's so much overtime being on both sides of our house. We have two of our main divisions are the patrol division and the jail division, and both divisions are very short staffed right now. Well, I don't want to say very short staffed, but short enough where it's causing some mandatory overtime. People aren't able to spend as much time away from the sheriff's office as they would like just because of the overtime. And then some of the other barriers is like you talked about in your bullet statements there is communication. I mean, we can't keep, we got to keep our eye on the ball when it comes to communication, being transparent and informative with our staff, and understanding that key to strengthening trust and morale is communication. So again, some of the things you touched on earlier, those are some of the barriers that we are having as well. But for me right now, my big thing is from what I hear from staff as the recruiting sergeant is, when are we getting more people? When are we getting more people? And so that creates this when they see that there's not necessarily anything right away that's going to happen, because even if we get people, it takes 12 to 18 months to get them trained up. So again, that's when you tell people, well, we got some coming down, but it's going to be a while. It can kill morale.
Dr. Rogers, it's good to hear Sergeant Shaddy say that morale is on the rise in their sheriff's office because of some things that they're doing, yet they still are getting the question, when are we getting more people? I'm curious to hear from your perspective, Dr. Rogers. What have you seen in terms of shifts in morale over the past 2 years as it relates to law enforcement?
One of the things that we're starting to see more and more of is officers that are getting tired. They're worn out. They're working extra hours. We're on the backside of 2 or 3 years of intense kind of life circumstances in the world, public scrutiny, those sort of things. And so, the folks we work with, they're feeling tired in so many different ways, and the difficult piece with that is the work doesn't stop. And so as numbers go down, the work goes up. As we're seeing extremes in thought process, officers are being asked to deal with kind of an unprecedented level of conflict. In some ways, folks who were, stayed in their home for a year or so are now being released back out into the public. And a lot of our folks have lost their ability to interact with others, which leads to more fights, more conflicts. And so a lot of the officers we're working with are just kind of overwhelmed, in this sense of there's that feeling of being unappreciated, that was mentioned earlier. There's a perception that officers are kind of expendable. We don't really need them. We can just plug somebody else in. So folks are feeling that feeling. One of the bigger things we hear is they're feeling unsupported. We're getting folks who are upset because they feel like leadership isn't there to protect them. And so, one of the common themes I often hear from folks is, if I'm proactive and I work, I get punished. But if I'm kind of lazy and I don't do things, then I can fly under the radar. I don't get in trouble. I don't get this, that. And so it's a weird time in terms of supporting our folks and getting them to a point where they feel like they have the resources to adequately and effectively do their jobs. So I guess my quick and summary of kind of what I'm seeing is, I'm seeing a lot of folks all over the place in terms of their perceptions of the current situation. But in general, folks are tired and they're struggling, and they're trying to get through each day and improve, and find creative ways to do that.
Deputy Geislinger, listening to Dr. Rogers, there are two words that come to mind are tired and overwhelmed. Law enforcement feeling like they're tired and overwhelmed. What are you hearing on this topic?
Exactly what he said, tired and overwhelmed. When people are short-staffed, so when we're short-staffed, that causes mandatory overtime. And when you're working mandatory overtime, most of the time that's either coming in early or staying late on your shift, which means you're now, you might miss a kid's sports game, or maybe you had dinner plans and now you have to work, or you even wanted to get some yard work done, but now you have to come into work early. So, when you're being forced to stay late or come in early, that is taking away time from you and your family and giving you that break that everybody needs. As everybody knows, law enforcement is a physically demanding job, but it's also a very mentally demanding job. We're not relaxed sitting at a desk, able to, take breaks when we want. I mean, if it's too busy, sometimes we don't get breaks. Sometimes we don't even get to take a lunch. Sometimes, we go off of the demand of what's happening for the day. So it is very tiring. So as both everyone has said, being short-staffed, that overtime, so people are asking all the time, when are we getting more people? When are we getting more people? The more we can be close to filling all of our vacancies, the better chance people can have for vacations and not have to work overtime and not have to stay late. So that's a main one. And then, of course, the one that everybody, I'm sure, is asking for right now is a pay raise. Inflation, as everyone has been experiencing, is crazy high right now, especially gas prices and just the cost of living, the grocery store expenses. All of that is almost kind of making it like we're taking a pay cut because inflation is so high. So the main things people at Washington County are asking for is a pay raise to kind of offset some of that inflation, and just getting more staff in so there's less overtime and the more availability to take time off and spend time with your family.
Deputy Geislinger, I think you anticipated my next question. I was going to ask you, what are you hearing the most from your peers? And it sounds like it boils down to two things, but tell me if I'm on the right track here. When are you going to get more people? We heard Sergeant Shaddy say that as well. And then also, they want to know about pay raises. Are those really the two main things that your peers are asking for?
Yep, those are the main things that we, when we walk down the hall and coworkers see us, they know that we do recruitment. This is our job, and so that's what they ask is, "Hey, when are we getting that raise?" And "Hey, when are we getting more people?" And that's, almost every day we get asked those questions.
I mean, as the recruiting team and as the recruiting sergeant, I pay close attention to what people are really, what's important to them, and we are currently in contract negotiations with our union. And so when people talk to me I come from a recruitment sergeant, but I also pay close attention to retention, because a big part of recruitment is also retention. And when you talk about pay raises, and you got to be competitive, but there also has to be incentives in there too, and incentives to stay around, because there are a lot of options for people right now, as opposed to law enforcement. So we're not only competing with other law enforcement agencies, we're competing with everyone when it comes to personnel, because people can leave right now, and go get a competitive wage that's not law enforcement. And so those are just some of the things that we have to really pay attention to, is what is going to get people here and what's going to keep them here.
Sergeant Shetty, let's stay on that for a second because you mentioned recruitment, you mentioned retention. I know earlier on in our conversation, you said you are seeing morale on an uptick because people are seeing the results of some efforts. I'm curious to know how your office is measuring morale. There may be some law enforcement offices who are here in our webinar who are trying to figure out we need a way to measure where morale is so that we can measure if it's going in the right direction or the wrong direction. So, from the Washington County Sheriff's Office perspective, how do you measure all this?
Well, one of the things that we're measuring it with is we like to put out a survey every once in a while, and to see where we're at with morale, and how we're doing as leaders in our agency, and how we're doing, and what we're some of the things that we're implementing to help that. Um, I mean, we look at things like, the possibility in the future of take-home cars for our patrol deputies. That's one thing that helps to see that we are making efforts. We don't have that right now, but we have looked at it, and then they know we've looked at it. And when you talk about gas prices, take-home car is a big deal. And then one of the ways I really like to measure how morale is, and how I feel that it's come up a little bit, is I go out and personally talk to people. Fortunately, with my schedule and flexibility, I have the ability to go out and talk to people, talk to our staff every day, and find out what their concerns are, find out what their issues are, and then also I can find out how they are with their morale. For the most part, I feel, at least in our agency, morale is, like I said, it's coming up, and I get that feeling just because they see the efforts that we're putting in to get things like the take home cars. Um, we're building a nice dining facility in our jail for our jail staff. So they see these efforts, and they see that leadership is really hearing what they're saying, and I think that helps create morale. And then also one of and we may touch on it later, one of the helps morale and the uptick is we just had one of our big local option levies go up for vote from our community to fund us, and it passed with 67% approval rating. So that's pretty huge for morale when our staff see that, and they see that our community still backs us. Again, the community may not want to be in law enforcement, they may not want their kids or family to be in law enforcement, but they support us.
I imagine seeing that vote, that more than half, in the 60% range there, people are supportive of the sheriff's office. That certainly is an indication to folks that work in the sheriff's office that the community does support you. I wanted to ask you about agency culture. You mentioned surveying the office, having your one-on-one conversations, having those community moments where you can see the community supporting. But from an internal perspective, what role does agency culture play when we're talking about morale, retention, and job satisfaction?
And I,
Well, I think one of the big things is we want to make it everybody feel that this was the agency of choice for them, as opposed to first offer or something to that effect. And our culture is that as the agency of choice, we take pride in the fact that we have really worked on and have always been a leader in things like training. Training is a big deal for us. Um, and so with our training facility that we've implemented, it has really built a way to make us the agency of choice. It helps build a better, confident, competent deputy when they have the training facilities and resources that we have to offer them. And so these are some of the ways that we are able to, build on some of that stuff.
Yeah, Dr. Rogers, did you want to weigh in there?
Yeah, I'll piggyback on that a little bit, just because I routinely get asked by different leadership kind of levels within departments. Doc, what would you suggest we do? How do we get more people? How do we create this culture? And there's a couple of things that I routinely fall back on with leaders, and they're real simple concepts, but we often overlook them. Honesty is a big thing your troops are looking for. They want folks who are going to tell them kind of the way things are, good or bad or indifferent, right? The honesty and the ability to kind of put things out there, have those difficult conversations. It's important for people to know that they're going to be told what's coming down the pike, what's coming up. And from that honesty, trust. One of the biggest things that will either make or break a department is trust for middle and upper management. And so if a department has a perception that their leadership is not going to back them or is going to kind of hang them out to dry, those sort of things, they're going to kind of jump ship and go somewhere else. I'm in a unique position where I do kind of pre-employment psyche evals. So I will see folks go to an agency, work there for 2 years, and go, this agency has the wrong culture, so I'm going to go somewhere else. And so when I do those secondary evals, I'll ask them, why are you leaving? And the number one answer I get is, I don't trust that our leaders have the character or the humility or our best interest in mind. And so I'm going to go to a department that does. Right. And so, I really think that honesty, I think that trust. And then I think we alluded to it earlier, but I want to piggyback on it some more and say, giving your folks a voice that is actually listened to. And I don't mean you give folks the opportunity to say things, you make all of their changes, those sort of things. But I like when I see departments doing roundtables, when I see departments doing Survey Monkey or sending stuff out, and then taking that data and presenting it back to folks and saying, here's what we found. So here's what we're going to do. And this is how our training is going to be impacted. Or, we found that folks want this and they feel like we're lacking in this area. So here's our goals for the next 6 months or the next 9 months. I think most departments spend way too much time kind of being reactive to situations and trying to put out fires instead of figuring out how can we be proactive and allow our people to put out those fires. So that's my 2 cents from the outside looking in.
Dr. Rogers, I want to stay on that for a second because we are talking about morale, retention, and job satisfaction. You've listed honesty, trust, and really listen to your employees, give them a voice. Is there a particular, as people are listening to that advice, is there a particular strategy that a law enforcement office can implement so that they are living out the honesty, living out the trust, living out that giving employees a voice?
I think the best way to do that, some of this requires a silent humility and confidence that some natural leaders really have. And what I mean by that is, one of the first ways to give your people a voice is to not interpret criticism or questions or those sort of things as attacks. One of the things I see a lot is you'll get folks that are voicing their opinion, and administrators perceive that as, you're attacking us, you're trying to bring down the department, this is conduct unbecoming, da 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 da, those sort of things, as opposed to it leading to a discussion. Some of the most effective leaders that I've seen in terms of morale are the folks that say, hey, I duly noted your point made. We're not going to change because of this reason, this reason, this reason, but we heard you, right? And so I think that validation of, we've heard you and here's what we're going to do instead, takes away some of that that kind of disgruntled, that disgruntled perception. And I'll give you an example of that. One of the things I hear lots of folks talk is they'll put out there things like, I have an open door policy. But you got to schedule an appointment 3 months in advance in order for that open door policy to be in effect. And I always tell leaders, if you're going to have an open door policy, you better have an open door. Leave the door open, let people show up, and you're going to be negatively impacted by them showing up. If you don't have an open door policy or you don't want one, then don't advertise it. What I always tell folks is be direct. If I'm going to have an open door policy, it's Monday through Tuesday from 8 to 10 a.m. That's the only time I got an open door policy. Well, people respect that because then they will schedule to show up at your office at 7:45 for that 8 a.m. open door policy. So I think that communication becomes real important in all of that as well.
So,
Hey, Charles,
yes, yeah, please.
just to kind of keep on that same point a little bit, one of the things, or a couple of examples that came out of the survey that we had a while back, that I think helped be transparent and help kind of solidify some of the things that we're trying to do as the leadership, is out of that survey, it came that people really distrusted our promotional process. And so out of that survey, we totally changed the way that we did our promotional process to try to be more, objective when we are, doing the process and creating a more, what they perceived as a more fair process in how we do promotions. And then one of the other things that came out of that survey was our tattoo and facial hair policy. So we heard them and we listened to them, and the things that we were immediately able to change, we changed. Yeah, we've listened to some of the other things and we're working on them, but I feel that when you hear the staff talk and there's a majority of the staff are saying the same thing and they're easy fixes, then we should really look at making those easy fixes, like the facial hair policy, the tattoo policy, the way that we do our promotional process. Those were fixes that we were able to implement pretty quickly, and I think it helped that trust from our staff.
Sergeant Shaddy, thank you for sharing that. And I still have a list of questions to get to, but we also want to hear from you. So if you have a question for our panel of experts, please feel free to enter it into the chat, and we're going to get to it as soon as we can. In fact, we do have one question from Ashley Griffin, who wants to know specifically for the Washington County Sheriff's Office. You mentioned overtime. How much overtime are you mandating?
Well, so it differs in the division. So the jail division right now, because of the way that jails are staffed, we have really hard minimums. And so we are having deputies getting mandatory overtime anywhere from 2 to 3 times a week, are getting mandatory to work like a partial shift 2 to 3 times a week. In the patrol division, it's not, they don't necessarily have as hard minimums. They can, the way that they can structure the staffing for a particular shift, they don't have as much of the mandatory overtime, but they still have overtime that is created by staffing. So I think Amanda can probably talk more about the patrol division and how that overtime's working there. But for the jail, it's pretty significant right now, the amount of overtime that each person is working every week.
And Deputy Geislinger, for your part of the Sheriff's Office, how does it work there in terms of mandating overtime?
Yeah, so on patrol, you might get some mandatory overtime because you get a late call, something happens at the end of your shift that you have to stay and finish. So that is typically more common than the sergeant calling and saying, hey, you have to stay today. It's usually more something has happened, a call has happened, and you're going to stay to take care of that. It does happen, but because there's not as much mandatory overtime on patrol, usually if there is spots, they'll send it out a day in advance or even on that shift and say, hey, we need a few people to stay, who wants to? And more often than not, somebody will volunteer saying, hey, I'll take that. Or they'll sign up for something on the weekend, or they'll volunteer to come in early because there's not as much of that. So it's filled more voluntarily than it is mandatory, whereas the jail, it's more mandatory.
I think where it affects patrol more than anything is the how we're able to serve the community. When you have, say, a hard minimum of 9 on a shift and you can go down to a soft of a 7, there's 2 positions right now. So your calls for service are not going to be as quite as effective as they should be. And part of what we want to be able to do for our community is when they call us, that we are able to respond fairly quickly. And we take, as an agency, we take pride in that. Is when somebody calls us, we take all calls, as opposed to some other agencies who are not able to do that right now because of their staffing levels. We take pride in being able to answer any call that comes in. We're going to answer. Yeah, they're going to be prioritized, but we will answer a call when somebody calls us, and we are obligated to do that. And that's what the sheriff demands. And so when we start getting low on some of our staffing levels, our community calls for service are not going to be as good as what we feel they should be.
Dr. Rogers, when you're working with law enforcement officers, how often do you hear that conversation around overtime, whether it's mandated, and how that relates to morale? Is that a topic that comes up in your conversations?
Yeah. The amount of hours, the workload is huge. It goes back to kind of one of the first things we were talking about with folks being tired. So some of the biggest struggles is when we start getting mandated overtime, or folks getting into that 60, 70 hour workload per week level. We tend to see it more in the detention center side of things, just because their staffing levels, are much more difficult to kind of maintain. But in general, we're seeing it across the board right now because you have fewer people, you got fewer people stepping up for the overtime. You've also got kind of generational differences, where we're getting kind of younger folks right now who value their free time a little bit more. And so they want to work that 40 hours and that's it. I don't want to work 48. I don't want to work 52. And so when those opportunities for, voluntary overtime comes up, you're getting, crickets. People aren't stepping up. And so what happens is the folks that do step up end up having to step up more frequently. And then your burnout kicks in, then your cynicism kicks in. Then you get a little bit more disgruntled and frustrated, and so I think it's kind of a domino effect, that's really difficult to fully fix until you get enough people to fill the body positions. So yeah, so I can reiterate everything they're saying.
Ashley Griffin, thank you for your question to our panel. And for others who are in this webinar, if you have a question for our panel of experts, please feel free to use the chat function to drop your question into the chat, and I'll make sure that we ask that question to our panel of experts. We have another question that's come in as well, and this is really for everybody. Deputy Geislinger, I'm going to start with you with this question. How does the character of the leaders, both good character and bad character, how does the character of the leaders impact department morale? Have you seen that at all? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think this applies just to law enforcement. I think any job in general. We hear people talk about it all the time. A good supervisor, a good leader is going to make all the difference. I actually am a search and rescue coordinator and cadet advisor here at the sheriff's office, and we teach a leadership class to our cadets. And one of the exercises we do is, hey, come up and tell us a story, good or bad, about, a supervisor. And they almost always come up and and they get to choose, and they almost always have a bad story about a bad supervisor, and it usually ends with, that's why I don't work there anymore. And these are kids that are only 16, 17, 18 years old, and they've already experienced that and left a job because of that. And then we kind of go back around and then ask them to tell us a good story too. And just watching them describe the good leadership versus bad leadership is a huge. So in law enforcement, I think leadership, having a good leader is everything. Super important.
One of the things that we often say to piggyback is people don't quit jobs, they quit leadership.
Mm.
Dr. Rogers, thank you for that. Thank you for that question. We've got a question from Cody in the audience. Cody wants to know, how is on-call affecting morale? We've talked about overtime and how it can affect it, but how is on-call affecting morale? Are your agencies paying for on-call? Sergeant Shaddy, anything that you can provide for us in terms of how on-call may be having an impact?
Yeah, we don't really have on call. It's not something we implement right now as far as our staffing. Obviously we have some special teams that are on call just because of the nature of their team that they have to be on call. But it's not something that we're implementing right now for any sort of staffing. Right now, say for instance in our jail division, just the mandatory overtime is the way that we fill the mandatory minimums that we have to fill. Unfortunately, you're going to get people that are mandatory overtime 2 days in a row sometimes just because of how it works out. But we will put out messages to staff, but they don't have to. And so, say somebody's off duty, they'll get an alert on their phone or email or whatever saying, "Hey, there's overtime available," but they don't have to respond to it. So it's not an on-call situation because we would have to pay them to be on call per the contracts.
Yeah, we have a little over 400 between jail and patrol deputies. So on call, when I think of that, I think is usually for smaller agencies who just don't have enough bodies. And so since we are a larger agency, yeah, like you said, we don't really do on call.
And I can jump in a little bit on call stuff. A lot of the agencies we work with have on call. On call in and of itself, we don't see it as a bad thing. But the way I tend to view it is on call is kind of a tank drainer. And what I mean by that is we have a tank that kind of refuels us emotionally, mentally for things. And we always refuel that tank when we get time off or we spend time with our friends, that kind of stuff. On call just has a tendency over the span of 6 months, 9 months, 12 months to slowly drain that tank almost as if there's a leak. So on call usually doesn't affect people till about 18 months, 2 years, 2.5 years of being on call. And then everybody's like, wow, why am I so exhausted? Well, it's because I've been on call for 2, 3 years. And so that's kind of how we view it is it just drains you a little bit more.
Dr. Rogers, thank you for that. Deputy Geisinger as well. Cody, thank you for your question. We have another question from Ashley who wants to know, you said you were doing a dining area for the corrections staff to help with morale. What are some other things that you're doing within the corrections division to help morale? Sergeant Shaddy, we'll start with you and then go to Deputy Geislinger.
So one of the main things that we implemented for our staff is break rooms. So as opposed to our lunchroom, which they're going to redoing for say lunch outside the secure perimeter of the jail, that's where we do our staff lunches. We built break rooms inside the jail. So specific dedicated break rooms where when they have their mandatory 15-minute break, they can go and have quiet time. They can sit and have snacks, have some drinks, or just sit and be not basically on duty for 15 minutes for their break. And we implemented that so it's more accessible to do it as opposed to walking clear outside the facility. They can go into these dedicated break rooms and have their 15-minute breaks. So just something like that, it goes a long ways, especially when they can go in there, they can re-nourish, rehydrate, and just get the batteries rejuiced for 15 minutes and take, that time away from work for 15 minutes, but not actually leave the secure perimeter.
Deputy Geislinger, anything that you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, so this isn't really a new thing for us, but out on patrol, again, we have a really good relationship with our community. So we have several churches and firefighters all throughout the county that have given us access to their break rooms. We even have a couple churches that actually within their church have created a break room specifically for law enforcement, and they stock it with water, with Gatorade, with snacks. They have TVs, couches, and that is specific for us. And they want to see us in their area, and they understand it's a busy job, and so they basically give us access to their buildings and say, come in whenever you want. So kind of talking about, we don't always get breaks, we don't always get lunches, but when there is time that we can do it, it is nice to be able to sit somewhere that is safe and secure. Instead of sitting in a car like this trying to type, eat a snack, you can actually sit down, take a minute, breathe, maybe take your vest off for a minute in the summertime. And that makes a huge difference as far as not being, maybe quite as exhausted by the end of the shift.
Something small but has a big impact that we may
Yep.
not recognize all the time. Sergeant Shaddy, Deputy Geisler, I wanted to ask you a question here. We've been talking a lot about morale in terms of inside the department, inside a sheriff's office, or inside a law enforcement agency. But what connection does that have to the actual work that happens outside the department and the way the community outside the department feels about the law enforcement agency? Is there a correlation between positive agency morale and how it impacts positive community engagement? Sergeant Shaddy, I'll start with you.
I definitely think it impacts. I think it's definitely that symbiotic relationship that, the community backing, the community support will create that good morale. And again, in turn, that those deputies out there working in the community, they're gonna give back that same sort of positive energy. And I think so. It's just this circle that I think creates that positive energy. And so, yeah, I mean, we get support by the community, and then we support the community in kind. And I think that's all as far as morale goes. I think it's positive. It's, we have, like I talked about, we have two major levies that get passed every 2 to 5 years. And they've passed for the last 30 years. They've never failed. That's huge when it comes to, telling your staff, your community supports you, and they've been supporting you for over 30 years. So we're gonna take that seriously. Our deputies are gonna take that seriously, and it's just that perpetual symbiotic relationship going on.
Dr. Rogers, do you see that as well when you're working with different law enforcement agencies, that if they focus on making sure that the morale is good inside the agency, that it has sort of a residual benefit in terms of community work, community involvement?
I think very much so. The happier people are, the more likely they are to do a good job and to kind of carry that over into other things. So if you've got a lot of folks that are disgruntled and struggling, they're going to be irritable in their interactions with other people. They're going to be irritable at home. They're going to end up having relationship issues. Relationship issues are going to lead to work issues, and it becomes this kind of vicious cycle. And so the better kind of environment we can create, the more resilient folks are in dealing with the traumas the job brings, right? And so, one of the things we're really pushing organizations is to create peer support teams so that, we're within the ranks reminding folks of the benefits of taking care of yourself, the benefits of the morale, the benefits of doing all these supportive based things, and how that can carry over into community policing and interactions with others.
Always good to see attendees asking questions, and we have some more questions to get to in the chat. This question is from Jeremy, and Sergeant Shaddy and Deputy Geislinger, I'm going to ask this question to you all first, and then we'll transition to Dr. Rogers. So first, Jeremy wants to know, how is the sheriff's office dealing with staff feeling that they are not valued or being used? So Sergeant Shaddy, Deputy Geislinger, whoever wants to answer that first, but Jeremy was curious to see how you all are tackling that.
Well, as Dr. Rogers said, we do have peer support, which we can provide to anybody who's feeling like that they're not being, valued. But I think it's just, again, it goes all the way back to that communication. We need to find out why they're feeling that way, and if it's legitimate concerns and it's real, then we need to take steps to fix it. And I think we really, especially, I can speak really educationally to my peer group, which is the sergeant group. And I know for a fact that the sergeants do a heck of a job of communicating with their staff. But again, I don't think you can over communicate. So if you know of a staff member who is feeling underappreciated or undervalued and not having, you feel that they're not feeling supported, we need to have those conversations. We need to communicate. We need to get to the whys. Why are you not feeling supported? Why are you not feeling valued? And then we can start working on those and work on the real stuff.
Absolutely. Dr. Rogers, let's go to you because I know you're working with a lot of different agencies. Are you hearing this across multiple agencies that this is a common problem, this idea that staff are not feeling valued or they feel like they're not being used?
Yeah, you get kind of waves of that perception and things that come in from kind of the media or communities, kind of outrage after an incident, those sort of things. One of the things that I really push when working with leaders is if we're hearing folks complaining, we got to listen to what they're complaining, but then we also got to empower them to correct some of the issues that they're identifying. So I'm a huge proponent for taking that complaint and then saying, okay, how are you going to fix it? And we're going to provide you with the resources to do it. So my staff is very trained in the fact that they know when they come to me and they say, hey, this is my problem. My response is going to be, okay, cool. What do you need to fix it? And then then they get to come up with a solution. Then we get to implement it. And then we do that. And if you empower folks, you'd be amazed at how much they will get done when we give them the authority and the tools to do it. And so that really is my recommendation when that complaint comes in is you're not using me. Okay, well then here, I'm going to give you the tools. Create a program for yourself. Create an op that you're going to do. Create a follow-up program, that kind of stuff, so that folks aren't sitting around being bored. Because one of the things that I see is, when officers get bored, they get cynical, they get destructive, they sit around and they bitch to their peers, and then peers start to work up, and so the busier we can keep people, the less we run into those issues too.
Dr. Rogers, thank you for that. We've got another question in that came from David. David, earlier in our conversation, we talked about generational differences, and David wanted to expand on that. He wanted to know, can you address the issue of the traditional hierarchy, rank, and trend towards a more horizontal structure with less power? Is there a need for a shift? And if so, how? Deputy Geislinger, wanted to get your thoughts on that. This idea of a traditional hierarchy or rank. How do you address something like that?
Yeah, that one's kind of a hard one to address, but I understand what he's kind of saying with the generational differences. Law enforcement is kind of structured similar to the military. So you have this person above you, you go to them. You don't just jump to the top of the rank, and there's always this rank structure. I I never really thought about that, about people having that as an issue before, but that is a good point. We haven't noticed that be too much of an issue. When we're out doing recruitment events, the main, more so than really that rank structure issue, we're getting questions about people, well, I don't have any experience in the military or in law enforcement, so I can't do this job. And, we always kind of turn that back around. Well, a main thing we focus on is training. So you don't need to have any experience in law enforcement. You don't need a military background to be able to do this job. We are going to train you and give you all the skills and everything that you need to be good and be confident in your skills to go out and serve your community. So I'm sorry, I don't really have a better answer for that because I just haven't come across that. Maybe someone else.
Well, I think just the nature of the way law enforcement is built, you have to kind of have that rank structure, and as opposed to that horizontal structure. But again, it comes down to how you are treating, and I hate the word subordinates because I hate that word. But it's how you can still have that rank structure, and because you got to have that respect for the rank, but you still need to have that relationship with your staff where they feel that there's not that us against them type mentality. And I think that's more important than getting into rank structure and having that vertical rank instead of that horizontal. Communication and having those talks with your staff, it's not going to affect whether your rank structure goes horizontal or vertical. But I think just the way that law enforcement is, you have to have that ranking structure.
And I'll jump in just to throw a couple things out there. I'm torn on this one, and I'll tell you why I'm torn, because there's a lot of good components to having a rank structure, and in terms of predictability and getting things done and efficiency and those sort of things. But there's also a lot of times where folks run into bad leadership and the rank structure prevents progress, those sort of things. I'm also keenly aware of generational differences. And I didn't mention this earlier, but I'm a high school wrestling coach. And so I deal with young kids and I'm dealing with adolescents, and I'm dealing with a generation now that assumes that their opinion is always valuable. Right. And so I'm routinely having conversations with my kids saying, you realize I don't really value your opinion because you don't have knowledge, you don't have experience, you don't have these things. And they'll become offended by that, right? And I'll have to say, well, you realize I'm a doctor, right? And I went to school and I do these things. And they're like, well, yeah, but I did a Google search, so I know almost as much as you do, right? And so like I said, I'm torn with this because we run into kind of differences in generations in terms of immediacy. I need gratification now versus taking risks, those sort of things, earned credibility. So I think the question itself is a great question. I think it's much more complex, and it would take me probably about an hour and 45 minutes to fully answer your question about kind of what works and what doesn't. I said, so I think there are benefits to both, and I think there are benefit or kind of setbacks or problems with both as well. So
Certainly a challenging topic to discuss, and one that's also very important. I want to go back to the chat here because Kathleen is thinking about things from a citizen standpoint. So Sergeant Shaddy, you talked about, every so often there's a public vote and we see the percentage or the level of confidence that the public has in law enforcement, and that is a good thing. Let's think about things from a citizen's perspective. If you're a concerned citizen and you want your local law enforcement agency to be in a good place because you see the importance of the agency, what can a citizen do to help in these matters of morale and retention, recruitment, things of that nature?
I think a lot of it is just showing that support. Be vocal about how you feel about your local law enforcement agency. And I hear it all the time. We go out to recruiting events all the time, and one of the major recruiting events we go to every year is our county fair. And I'll go out and I'll spend, anywhere from 9 to 15 hours at the county fair on a weekend, and all I hear is people coming up and thanking me and showing that support. And I feel as a citizen, if that's the way you really feel, then go tell other people. Support the stuff on social media. If you see the sheriff's office putting out stuff on social media, comment on it. Make those, because we get enough of the negative comments on those posts. Let's go out. Let's hear a lot of those positive posts. And the positive posts well outnumber the negative posts, but just keep vocal about how you feel about your sheriff's office, how we're doing. Let us know how we are doing, and if there's something that we're not doing well, let us know that as well. Because our sheriff takes any of that stuff very serious. And if there's changes we can make to make it better, then that's what we're going to do. So be vocal, whether it's good or bad, be vocal. And as long as, the negative stuff is legitimate, let us know if it's something that we can fix.
one of the things I'll throw out there just along those lines is kind of twofold. One is I'm a big proponent for citizen police academies from an educational standpoint and folks getting the knowledge based from it. But I'm also a huge proponent with the general public about being critical thinkers and actually analyzing situations, because I run into this a lot where folks will see a news story or they'll see a video clip and then they'll come to me and say, did you see that video clip? And they're upset or frustrated. And I'll say, I saw the video clip. And my response will typically be, did you do any research about the 45 minutes leading up to the video clip? Or did you read the background? Or did you do this? And 99 times out of 100, the response I get is, no, I should do that. And my response is, yeah, because that video clip is a snapshot. So one of the things I really teach folks when I talk.
Dr. Rogers, I think we've lost your audio.
Am I back?
Here. Yes, you're back now.
Okay, back. Just so really be critical thinkers and educate yourself, and then you provide your support and those sort of things, because at that point you're able to provide educated information to folks. So
That's a really great point, and wish I would have thought of it, but yeah, when you get those interactions with the community and they bring up some of those concerns, just help educating them on law enforcement situations and what what a deputy or a police officer is going through in different calls and different instances, and making them, like you said, Dr. Rogers, is that critical thinker. Let's educate yourself. I will help educate you as much as I possibly can, but educate yourself as opposed to just seeing one little clip on the news and making some sort of judgment just off that, and think for yourself a little bit.
Yeah, and to piggyback off of what both of them have said, we use our PIO, our Public Information Officer, a lot for this kind of stuff when we're talking about somebody seeing a short clip that might give you a negative thought about law enforcement. Our PIOs are very upfront. So if we know there's something big, we want to put the information out, and it's not going to be biased. It could be good information, it could be bad information, but we're going to give you the facts, because it works internally and externally that people get mad about something that they don't understand because they don't have all the facts. And since doing this recruitment position, I've had so many people come up to me upset about something, about, oh my gosh, why is this happening? And it's like, well, that's actually not true. Here are the facts. And I mean, just with a quick 5-minute conversation, they're, oh, okay. And they're no longer upset about something because they just didn't understand it. And then, like I said, so that's an internal thing and an external thing. So just, again, back to communication, giving people as much information as we can is really going to help people make their own decisions, but with all of the facts instead of one side of the story.
Deputy Geislinger, thank you for that. We've probably got time for one more question before we wrap up to stay on time here. This last question is coming from David. David says, this is possibly related to the generational shift in their attitude about rank and power, but is there a need to explore the traditional model regarding discipline? Dr. Rogers, I'll start with you.
In terms of, I think you're asking a question that really wants us to dig deeper into kind of how we process information and kind of how we do things and whether we're resilient and those sort of things. So my take is we've got to be keenly aware of the differences in how we're raised, what we kind of deal with, how we deal with it, how we view situations. I was at an academy recently doing some training, and I ran over about 15-20 minutes, and I didn't think much of it. Left the academy. The next week I came back to the academy, and one of the instructors said to me, "Hey, Dr. Rogers, is there any way you can finish at about 4:30 today?" And I said, well, why? And he goes, well, last time you were here, you ran over 15 minutes, and then our cadets had their 15 minutes of cleanup afterwards, and so they didn't get out of here till 5:30. And I looked at him, I said, okay, so what's the problem? Well, they're supposed to get out of here at 5. And I said, okay, what's the problem? And he goes, well, one of them filed a complaint because they didn't get paid for overtime for that 30 minutes. And I laughed and said, really? I said, I've been doing this a long time. I may be cynical, I may be old, but you realize I'm going to now hold them till 5:45 today in order to have punishment for that complaint, because that's silly. That's part of your job. That's commitment, right? And he goes, no, we can't do that anymore, Dr. Rogers. You have to adjust to the new way the world works. And I was like, I don't know if I can do that, right? And so I tell you that story because we just have differences that are starting to come in, and now we've got to incorporate that into our training, into how we interact with folks, how we supervise, and it's kind of across the board. So that's my quick story to kind of give that perspective about generational stuff.
And I'm not so sure what they meant by the traditional discipline, or however it was explained, but per per collective bargaining, there's certain ways you have to do discipline. And so we work on what we call progressive discipline. So we're documenting things when they first, well, hopefully we're documenting stuff as they, issues as they first arise. And then you take care of things, as low as you can. And then you got that progressive discipline and you document along the way. But we can't really deviate a whole lot from how collective bargaining says we have to do discipline. So that's kind of where we're at with discipline. Yeah, we're gonna take steps to try to take care of things before we actually get into real discipline. And that again, that goes to supervision and leadership and being a good supervisor and being able to make those, those work plans or those, what we need to see from you to help you and what you need from me to help you succeed type stuff. That's supervision and leadership. When it comes to the actual discipline, then you get into you have to do it a certain way.
Well, Dr. Rogers, Sergeant Chatty, Deputy Geislinger, thank you all very much for joining us today. Thank you for what you're sharing. Thank you for the lessons that you've learned, that you've passed on to others. I'm sure that people who are attending the webinar are taking a lot, have taken a lot from what you all have shared with them, and will be implementing some of those ideas and strategies in their own law enforcement agencies. We want to thank you for attending this webinar. If you have any questions that you want to follow up with us, we will provide an email for you to do that. So a big thank you to our panelists and a big thank you to everyone who joined us today. We will share a recap of this video, of this conversation, and we welcome your feedback in our survey. On behalf of the entire team at Utility, we want to thank you very much for making time to be with us today. Stay well, and we hope to see you at our next webinar event.
Thank you.
Thank you.